of advice do you have to homeowners?
Practicing that preparedness. Starting the conversation now is always going to be a benefit to any association out there.
And welcome to Recovery Report Live. I'm Dan Odess, president of GlobalPro, where we manage your risk to recovery, and we have managed more than $1 billion in that recovery. We represent business owners, community associations, high net worth individuals alike, in making sure that they get the most from their insurance, whether it's from obtaining new insurance to recovering from loss. We want to be your source for insurance news you can use, and that's why we have the Recovery Report every week at 11 o'clock on Thursdays. If you haven't yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel, like us on Facebook. You'll get all the updates that you need. And we have a packed show today. We have a great guest. I'm very excited about it. But before we get there, I want to talk about some important information, particularly for business owners, as it relates to a new bill proposed in New Jersey, really on the cusp of trying to change things. I'm scratching my head at this one a little bit, though, because I don't really understand why it's being paraded around as a victory for business owners. As with anything, it's a bit insurance related. It's a bit confusing at first. I'm sure there's an explanation for it, and I'm sure someone can justify it for me and explain to me why, if my policy didn't exclude for pandemics, why I need to now buy an endorsement for it. Especially when my policy that I had when the pandemic occurred didn't exclude viruses, but the renewal suddenly has an exclusion added to it for viruses. Does that mean that my policy didn't exclude for viruses? Does that mean that I need now to get pandemic-related coverage? And by the way, there's always been a pandemic form out there, which they acknowledge that I could have added to my policy if an insurance company would sell it to me. And some insureds did get it. We did hear early on about some insureds actually getting paid for damages related to these losses. But was it a pandemic form? Was it a virus form? What was it, and how did they do it? How did they even get actually this added to their policy? It's a mystery. I'm not sure about it. There's a lot of things to unpack in this one. I flagged this article that just came out about it. Again, it's a New Jersey bill. It's just being proposed. It's getting a lot of support. There's a lot of hype around it. I think it's just, people want answers. They want to understand what's going on. And I assume this is just one way of trying to get those answers for these policyholders who really can't reconcile the things that I just mentioned. It didn't exclude viruses before the pandemic. I made a claim, you denied me. Then suddenly I get a renewal. You add an endorsement that now excludes viruses. But how did you deny my claim before if viruses were not specifically excluded? In fact, that is what is holding a lot of these cases in court, is that they're making this argument. Lawyers have amended or added to their complaints this issue, which is that it didn't exist. Now it does. So why they're touting this victory, that there's this proposed bill that's going to help these business owners in the future so that you have access to buying it. Let's talk about one of the realities of insurance, the cost of it. What is it going to cost to insure something insurance companies have alleged is uninsurable in these lawsuits? That's also a point at which I'm scratching my head at. What is it actually going to cost to buy pandemic insurance? What kind of coverage are you going to get? Is this going to be like wind-driven rain, where wind and rain from a hurricane is something other than hurricane damage? Because they certainly perverted those policy endorsements and exclusions when we saw the losses occurring from Hurricane Irma. Many of them backtracked off of it, ultimately paid millions of dollars to a lot of our clients and many others. But the reality is that they used that as an opportunity to, I guess, learn to see if they could do it. And then they came back the following renewal periods and changed the language to specifically call out named storms and other issues. So I'm again, scratching my head. I'm not sure if this is just hot air or if this is actually a real solution. At one time, they're proposing some type of national insurance like flood. Where's that? What happened with that conversation? Again, we still have a number of these cases pending. Things, very confusing. You got some courts that just don't want to hear anything to do with a virus claim or anything to do with a pandemic-related loss to any sort of business, despite hard evidence that viruses and things can attach to surfaces, and you actually had to change or modify, physically modify your place of business where your customers and your vendors could not physically enter or access your property. But again, this wasn't physical. This is a virus. You can't see it. You could just simply clean it, just like soot, but I can get paid for that when a fire occurs, right? Or if there's mold on the surface. certainly you can clean some of that. And speaking of mitigating and repairing and fixing things, our next guest, I'm excited to talk to today about these issues, particularly as it relates to our storm season and hurricanes. Important issues, because a lot of times what we're seeing is that people will run to rebuild without having a strategic plan of how to deal with the obligations in your policy, the obligations to your unit owners, the obligations to your investors, whatever it may be, the steps to take to protect your interests, so not only for your recovery, but all of the interested parties, whether they're, again, be your unit owners, your investors, your business partners, whatever it is, your banks, very important there too as well, because your lien holders want to know what you're doing. So what is the best strategy to doing? I want to bring on our next guest, Mr. Jonathan Weislow. I'm finding, here we go, Jonathan. Let's bring you on here. Sorry, Jonathan, the things jumped around here on the screen here. There you are. There, I got you on there. All right.
I'm here.
Sorry, apologize for that. That was a little bit.
I'll introduce myself and say my own name because.
Oh, there you go. And I even said
there's a 90% chance people are going to fumble it anyway, so don't worry, man.
All right, go ahead.
So look, I'm Jonathan Weislow, Vice President here at Amacon Management. I think coincidentally, this is the first recovery report in hurricane season, and what better way to do it than have a Miami hurricane on the show? So thanks, man. Thanks to you in the GlobalPro team for having me. Look, we're a full-service real estate and construction firm. We specialize in local owner representation. We've been doing this for 25 years. We've built a team of industry leaders in awesome personalities and just great people that specialize in every sector of construction. We offer owner representation and expert advocacy for developers, for hospitality groups, for restaurants, which is a unique sector within hospitality, as I know you're aware. Luxury residential, especially now, is probably booming more than ever in South Florida. Nonprofits, and specifically, I think for this segment, we have a team that works just with condo associations, which is very unique, probably more unique than any other sector. I know you're extremely versed in it.
Yeah. So let me ask you. So on your website, it talked about a vertically integrated real estate and construction services. I mean, that's how you guys explain your services. What to you and at Amicon? I mean, you talked about the different services. What does it mean to be vertically integrated for you, and how are those construction services accessed by our clients? I mean, what are they looking for when they come to Amicon?
Yeah, look, they're looking for expert advocacy. So a lot of times, construction is by nature an extremely convoluted and complicated process. That's misunderstood, oversimplified, or overcomplicated. You typically never see people who traditionally understand it. And if somebody does have experience, every single experience in construction is unique. So they're really just looking for somebody to show them the way and provide solutions in a vernacular and a language that they can understand. So we can handle a project everywhere in its life cycle, from initial concept all the way through. We have a division that specializes in taking over troubled projects. We can come in right in the middle with an existing team and run the project to completion and close out from there as well.
All right, so I just get a little know, so the guests can get to know you a little bit here. How did you get your start at Amicon, and I guess what sets Amicon apart? Because you do have some competitors in this space that are providing construction services, and I think it's an important bit to understand a little bit what makes and sets Amicon apart. Obviously the team, but how did you get started there? In your role as vice president, what does that mean, and how are you part of that process?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, look, before I talk about, me, we do have competitors in the space, and we're super grateful that there are competent people out there who are doing what we do. There's such a need for it in the market. And I think as some of these groups gain more experience and remain competent in this space and develop a high level of professional service, it gives credibility to what we do. So we're super grateful for that and appreciate it. So I've got a very non-traditional path here.
Yeah. I know that. That's why I wanted to talk about it. So tell us about it.
Yeah, man. So I played baseball at the University of Miami. I'm from Virginia originally. I had an opportunity to play baseball at Miami. I've got a football here, which shows better it shows better for the show. So that's why I chose the football.
Yes.
I just want to make sure everybody saw the U.
Very proud.
I played baseball there, and I got injured late on in my career, which was great because I was not going to be in the major leagues. I wasn't good enough, and I didn't work hard enough. So my injury kind of figured that out for me, and I had to call an audible and find another career path. So we had a sports psychologist on the team who was awesome, Doug Hirschhorn, and who now does high performance executive coaching. And I was like, you know what this guy does, super cool. I was like, show me how to be you, guy. And so I ended up pursuing a master's in clinical psychology from the University of Miami. Thought I wanted to be a sports psychologist. And after I finished that, I realized it's a really cool hobby to have, but as a career, just for me, it seemed to be pretty monotonous. So I took a year after I finished my master's. I was working in genetics research, which just makes me sound really smart, but I was really just a data entry monkey. And I had an opportunity, because I did have spare time, to get involved with a nonprofit organization called CFIT, through the Vision for Tomorrow Foundation. And the head of that organization was Adam Opsick, who's our CEO. So he and I did a nonprofit venture together, which was very, very successful. And as we were coordinating that, he was like, listen, man, I don't know what you're planning on doing, but why don't you come work for me? And that was about 10 years ago. And kind of right place, right time. He's been an amazing mentor to me. And since then, we've grown exponentially and been very fortunate to do what we do.
Well, as a graduate of Florida State, we might have to cut this interview short, but no, it's fine. I always find you Kane guys a little bit proud of that youth. So, but full disclosure, my wife did go to University of Miami Law. She's a proud grad, and we used to bet each other who had to wear what shirt to what game. So a few times I had to wear that Kane shirt to the Florida State game, and it was tough, man. I always try to justify putting on the raincoat like it was going to rain that day or something. But well, it's great to have you with us, and I want to talk a little bit about the topic of today, which is remaining strategic in the midst of emergency repair. Definitely an important issue, particularly certainly for community associations. I think the pandemic put us all on high alert as far as preparedness. So we want to take a one step, okay? The loss has occurred. What are we going to do? How are we going to strategically plan for this? And I really like to, a lot of times, really focus on the mistakes. Obviously, best lessons are learned from mistakes. And hopefully you're not the one making them, but if you do, you don't repeat them and you try to avoid doing it again in the future, or even, or at least analyzing the situation and identifying what led to that mistake so that you can early on see if you're headed in that same direction or have some sort of indicator. So what are the three common mistakes in conducting emergency repairs, and how can owners and managers avoid them?
Yeah, great question. So I think oftentimes there's just a culture of reacting, right, and just wanting things done so fast that people just start calling contractors and fixing problems without properly documenting. It's super important to document all the damages before mitigating. At the end of the day, assuming that it qualifies under your insurance, you're going to look to get reimbursed for any of these mitigation measures. So also, the long-term vision of the property is often not taken into account because you're spending so much time just reacting. And that's why I think you and I agreed to just tackle the strategy and discuss that. You should always have in mind the long-term strategy of the property. If you're looking at some point making improvements to a property, this may be an opportunity to fix what's damaged and obviously take care of any life safety concerns, but also it may expedite the commencement of an improvement that may be more aligned with the long-term vision of the property. And then, especially with condos or people who have multiple fiduciaries or boards, have a communication plan set. Have a communication plan that you're ready to act on. Oftentimes, the way in which that the strategies are communicated can dictate everybody's reaction. And I think the calmer and more prepared you appear, can really dictate the culture that occurs afterwards as a result of hearing that communication.
Yeah, it certainly will avoid a lot of hysteria and issues that we see and hear of from a lot of these associations or even business owners after a major loss where, I mean, for a business owner, like you can't get a hold of your employees, you don't even know when they're going to come back. You had nothing in place, you know, for them to check in and you didn't set a certain expectation. And I think that's something that's obviously so important and something you touch on. And I've had experience in working side by side with Amicon, who do represent a number of our community association clients. And this was talked about early on, usually was as a result of some other type of loss they had, and as they're talking about the rebuilding phase and getting back to normal, and then they start planning for the future, we start talking to them about strategically how they can use this as an opportunity to improve the building and do different things. And I don't think people sometimes look at that and they're so fast, and they're running so fast and so hard, and they're just simply trying to satisfy the one or two people that are driving them crazy, rather than protecting the interests of the rest of the association and acting on their actual fiduciary obligations.
So let's stop there, because you bring up a great point. You said one or two people. We call them the vocal minority, right? So there's typically like people who are just louder than everybody else. You can take it because it's true. There's people who are louder than everyone else, have longer emails, more frequent emails than everybody else that go to the property manager or to the board. And they typically don't represent the majority of the population who live there. Most people who live in these buildings are rational, they're reasonable, and they're busy and they're occupied with other things. So it's really important that the property managers and the boards who have been appointed in these positions because they're responsible people, they've been elected to these positions, which they're not getting paid for, right? To be strategic, to be thoughtful, and to represent the best interests of the property holistically, not just to satisfy one or two people who are loud. I think the more assertive they are in their communication and the way in which they respond or don't respond to that vocal minority can really dictate the success of the project.
Well, I love it, man. You should coin that phrase, because I think it's something that we could use over and over again. It's certainly something we contend with a lot, and it's so frustrating, and it's just, you know, the funny thing too is that you always frequently they're not even the ones on the board, and they never run for the board positions, but they somehow feel the need to poke and prod everyone that's actually trying to make the decisions, that are the ones charged with doing it, that are obligated to make decisions, making everything much more difficult than there. So, how can an owner or manager plan for long-term health of the building rather than just the immediate requirement needs? We talked about it, but what does it take to actually do that? Like, what are they looking for in that long-term plan?
Yeah, look, as a property manager, I think that's probably one of the most underappreciated positions that's out there right now. You never see the best of anybody. You're constantly just responding to problems, and people are never their best selves as they're interacting with you, right? So I have tremendous respect for the people in that position. But oftentimes they're spending so much time responding to just ongoing maintenance issues that there really hasn't been a long-term strategy that's been put in place. So I think whenever there's an opportunity, or maybe some sort of regular interval, and I'm not going to tell property manager how to manage the property because I haven't done it, but there needs to be a consistent narrative in place with the active board that has buy-in from the residents as to what the overall goals are for the property. Ultimately, everybody wants the same thing, right? First of all, they want to live an unobstructed lifestyle. It's their home. Okay? They want to be comfortable there. They generally want their amenities to be, if there are amenities, to be, operational. And they want their properties to, at a minimum, hold their value and generally appreciate in value, which means they need to keep up with market conditions. So there needs to be a narrative that's established with buy-in from the board and the residents as to what the long-term goals are for the property to raise property values.
No, I think it's a great idea. And one of those costs that they need to take into consideration is soft costs and contingencies. It's something I wanted to add, I wanted to talk about. It's an issue that's come up quite a bit when dealing with this long-term planning and the actual cost of doing the emergency repairs and the recovery. I want to break down soft costs and contingencies just so our audience understands what it means in on the construction world. And because I will tell you, on the insurance side, most of these adjusters I deal with and examiners or whatever else have no idea what actual soft costs are in the construction industry or why contingencies need to actually be in the contract. They seemingly just strike those out every single time when dealing with the insurance company. So what are they, and what should our audience know about soft costs and contingencies? Why are they so important to a contractor and also to your client?
Let me just throw a little credit your way for asking awesome questions. These are super important. Look, a lot of times people who have done some iteration of a construction project believe it's probably faster and more efficient just to go to a contractor and have them to start doing the work, right? A contractor's job is to execute a plan and details that a design consultant has put together, okay, and that the owner has signed off on. That's their job. They execute. We firmly believe that the most important time and most important dollars you can spend on a project are on getting information, right, and in planning and strategy, period. That's your soft costs. In soft costs are all of the consultants that need to be hired. So depending on the kind of project it is, you've got a designer, an architect, sometimes they're one and the same, specialty engineers, anybody from civil, structural, MEP engineers. You may have inspectors, threshold inspectors, permit processing fees, permit processors. There's a number of waterproofing consultants, especially on condos. I could keep going on. All of these consultants are so important. The higher and the more accurate the information is from them on the front end, oftentimes meaning the more time you spend with them discussing the overall goals, big picture on the property, and the more they understand that as they put together their analysis and their plans, the more accurate the contractors are going to be able to be in their execution, in their pricing, and overall in the schedule of the project. Now, contingencies range, right? If it's a restoration project, if it's a remodel project, I mean, these are old existing buildings. The drawings that are often provided or that are on file are no longer accurate because there's been work done over the years that was never documented. That happens. So for any sort of remodel or restoration, and the older the property is, the larger the contingencies get, because there are a fair amount of unknowns, and something that we stand by, we pride ourselves on, is having sufficient contingencies. And people call it fluff all the time. It's absolutely necessary. When we put a contingency in a project, we expect that it's going to be spent on the scope of work. It's not free money that you can then go use to do a spa or we expect it to be spent.
No, and being a contractor and having run jobs, both large and small, commercial, residential, I have firsthand experience in dealing with that, and sometimes the contentions that these are unnecessary, or the fluff, as you mentioned. Now, when you get on the insurance side of things, as later in my career, as I've done more and more of it, it's utterly amazing how these adjusters are supposed to be putting together a cost evaluation on what it's going to take to put back a property, and they don't include any sort of money for contingencies, and they completely water down the actual soft costs that are necessary. The engineers and the irony is that in a lot of these community associations, and a bit of advice for some of our community associations that are tuning in and watching this, whether you're a manager or a board member, is that your bylaws may require you to engage an expert like Amacon, someone on Jonathan's team, to actually direct the entire construction project. And it's a requirement per your bylaws. So you need to look closely, because what it'll say in there is either a construction professional or an engineer must be hired in order to look at these projects and guide them. And it's a necessary and required cost, and it's something that must be included in your recovery and must be included in there as part of the emergency repairs, whatever it's going to take. Because like you were speaking about earlier, Jonathan, think long term. While you are making an emergency repair, it's important to understand how it may impact what you're doing later on, because again, once you start recovering that money and start the rebuilding efforts, whether it's mitigating it to the emergency repair, the temporary repairs, or the permanent repairs, you may run out of money, or you may overspend on something and without consideration for what you're going to do next, and you could have done something differently, and unfortunately you can't unring the bell once you've done it, and there's no more recovery there. Jonathan, it's been awesome to have you on here. I think there's been a fantastic amount of information provided. It's obviously a lot to digest, and want to make sure that audience can get a hold of you, contact you guys in any way. What's the best way to find out more about Amacon?
Sure, you can go to our website. It's Amacon.us. United States, certainly not like University of Florida. And they can go to info@amacon.us is the best email if you have a project inquiry, or you can call my cell phone. 571-830-4235. I haven't changed my Virginia number since I landed in South Florida.
That's awesome. That's fine. All right. You don't have the 305, man. You know, you got the Miami Hurricane ball behind you, you know, but it's okay. It's easy. It's a lot easier to keep those numbers than to change them. That's for sure.
Absolutely.
Thank you again, Jonathan. It was awesome to have you on. Definitely a wealth of information. I encourage everyone to contact Amicon with any sort of your projects. They take a look at these things. I've been there. They walk you through it, and they'd be more than happy to come out the project and consider it. So again, Jonathan, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks a ton, Dan.
All right, well, awesome segment, great interview. Jonathan provided an amazing amount of information about what things you should be considering when you're planning for your emergency repair, as well as things to consider once you start doing your recovery and costs you should expect, things that may be unexpected, right? You need a plan for the unexpected a bit. So making sure you have those soft costs, those contingencies, that's what that's what they're there for, to help you have the professionals in place to make sure that you mitigate your issues and that you consider that maybe things aren't going to go as planned as always, but with a long-term plan, you can avoid a lot of those issues. And a lot of these things are pretty routine. People are like, oh, well, you know, I don't know what's going to happen, or I don't know what to do. But the thing is that with a professional like Amacon, with Jonathan by your side, they've seen so many projects, they've seen so many issues that they may be able to anticipate many of the things that you should see or expect during your project, and will be able to better budget for that. And when we're seeing increased costs of insurance that are at historical highs, like just raising rates, you're seeing a lot of special assessments we're hearing about with community associations and dealing with typical operating expenses, not special projects, not improvements to the building, things like that. Make sure that you're planning properly for in the event that if something were to happen. Make sure that you have the right people in the right place, that you're properly reserved, that you set the expectations of your unit owners and all those people that are helping you. It's so important to the recovery for a community association or your business. I mentioned, even for business owners, being able to contact your employees, making sure that they have access to you and you have access to them, or that they know when to show up without actually having to contact them following any major event, will help you in your recovery, because that should be part of your emergency repair plan. Should be what is happening and where are the employees going to be at that time, at that moment, and how might they be helping you as an owner get back to business as usual. Well, it was a great episode. I'm so glad all of you tuned in today. Remember, we are continuing to count down 10 years. We're super excited. We're going to be telling all the history about what it took to get to where we are, what we're planning for the future, including new technology that we're rolling out. We want to engage you in every such way, so make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube page. Make sure you like us on Facebook. Hit us up on Instagram, whatever, Twitter. We're on every single one of the platforms, making sure you have access to the information you can use. Again, we're back here next week at 11 o'clock on Thursday for another episode of Recovery Report Live. Again, thank you, Jonathan, and for all those that tuned in today, we'll see you next week on the Recovery Report Live.